Well, good morning. It's good to see everyone here today. Glad you came back after Dustin's message. But no, seriously, it's such a good message for all of us. You know, if we're walking toward Jesus, there's going to be things that we have to reflect on our lives. And some of those are small things and some of those are big things, but all of them are important to make sure, you know, we're going on the right track to God. So it's really good.
So what we want to do this morning is share our story. And I know Lori, when she introduced us yesterday, talked about we've been married for 13 years, so that was in May. And it's a miracle, literally a miracle that we're together. And so we give God all the glory for what he's done. But I was going to share, we're going to go back and forth and share a little bit about our lives. Our different backgrounds, there couldn't be more opposite, but I grew up in Florida. And my parents moved down there when I was about 7 years old. We lived on a little island, a little fisherman village called Pine Island. And for most boys, it would be like a paradise. We had a canal in the back. We had a boat. We could go out in the woods across the street. It was like, you know, a very safe place. But how many know that the devil isn't just in big cities? You know, he's everywhere. And when I was 7 years old, I was exposed to pornography against my own will at a bus stop with some kids. And really, that opened up a door that led to addiction in my life for almost 20 years. I had a friend at a young age who was into all kinds of just like a lot of dark music and hypnotism and all kinds of weird stuff I was exposed to, satanic music and things. And so I grew up going to church. So my mom got saved after my parents got married. My dad was not a believer, and early on, he was very against Christianity. So I had two competing messages growing up. My mom would take us to church, and we'd hear about Jesus. My dad would tell me all this New Age philosophy, Jesus is everywhere, God is in everything, all this kind of stuff. And I knew that they couldn't both be right. But as a kid, I remember wondering, how could they both be true? Because you want to believe your dad, you want to believe your mom, you want to believe your parents. And so for me, I was very confused spiritually. But I had a friend who was into all this stuff, and I got exposed to a lot. And although I would have called myself a Christian, I ended up as kind of just in the wrong place at the wrong time a lot of times. So I had this friend that kind of really influenced me. And my parents' marriage progressively fell apart. And when I was 11, I remember clear as day, my parents sitting me and my sister down and just explaining, you know, we're getting a divorce, and we just think this is the best thing for our family. And I remember that day, I started crying. I ran out the door. I rode my bike to a friend's house, and I got there, and I told him what was going on. And I remember that day hardening my heart and saying, I'm never going to allow this to bother me. Like, I'm going to make it on my own. I don't need my parents, kind of thing. And shortly after that, I got into just all kinds of started drinking and started abusing marijuana. It started off with that. I went through a long period of what we would call today gender, confusion or whatever. I was into Marilyn Manson and Nine Inch Nails, some of those bands that they cross-dressed and all these things. So I started cross-dressing in school. I grew out my hair. I wore all black, and I was one of those goth kids. Really, I hated the church. I hated the world. I just hated everybody, including myself. And at 14, I attempted suicide in my freshman year of high school. I swallowed a bunch of pills. The Lord spared me, but I came out of that experience. The government said, if you don't clean up your life, we're going to take you out of your house, and we're going to put you in a home for troubled teens. And so even though I didn't like my home life, I still would have rather been there than in a camp for teenagers. So I just remember I cleaned the outside of myself. I cut my hair. I started listening to hip-hop music. And it was like almost overnight in school, I got accepted into the popular crowd. And the popular crowd in our school, everyone did drugs. We went to parties and raves and all that kind of stuff. And so I started experimenting with anything I could get my hands on. And I remember determining in my heart, as a drug addict, that I would do certain things, but I always thought like the cocaine and the heroin users, those were like the real drug addicts. And so even though I was abusing drugs every day, I always had like my standards of where I wouldn't go. But when I was 18, a guy at work actually introduced me to cocaine, and I started abusing cocaine, and basically within a year, I lost everything. I was living in a car, and I had burned bridges with everybody, and pretty much came to to the end of my to the end of my rope. But Brittany's going to share her story before we catch back up with where I ended up.
So I grew up in a strong Christian household. Both my parents were saved. They tried to raise us right, to know God. Personally, we were in church all the time. We were involved. My mom had married my dad when she was 16 to get out of an abusive father situation at her home, and had all four of us by the time she was 25 years old. And when I was 3, my dad died in a car accident, and I don't remember a whole lot of that. I know it affected me throughout my years growing up, wondering why that happened and why he had to miss parts of my life. My mom remarried when I was 5, and he was a good Christian man. He still is. He was a newer Christian, and just like any step family, you have hardships and things that are hard to deal with. But my parents really tried to raise us right and in God, and I always knew God as my father. I think he just showed me how real he was as my father, because my father had passed, and my stepfather is just like a father to me. We're very close, but God just kind of revealed himself in that way. So I've always had this wonderful picture of God as my father and God's love for me. And so when I was in high school and junior high and those peer pressure times, I didn't give in. I realized the consequences of those. I'm a very practical person, so I was kind of like, okay, if I do this, this is where it's going to lead. Why would I do that? So I really didn't. I probably lied to my parents and, some of those things, but I never got into drugs. I never, really rebelled and ran away from God, because I just knew he was always there, and I knew that he cared for me, and I wanted to please him, and I wanted it to be a relationship that I had with God, and not just because my parents told me to, or because they're Christians, I'm a Christian. I wanted it to be personal and for me. So I just never really had those struggles. And in high school, I just, pursued God. And when I was thinking about going off to college, I prayed and asked God, where I should go. And so that was kind of my upbringing.
So, yeah, you could tell, they say opposites attract. I don't know, if that's what happened here. But so I was 18 and lost everything. I was basically... I burned every bridge, and my parents had heard of Teen Challenge. There was a connection with my home church, and probably most of you are familiar with Teen Challenge, Christian drug and alcohol rehab, started by David Wilkerson. So I came to a place where I was at a crossroad, and I had nothing left. I just couldn't live anymore. I had nothing, and so I remember my parents offering to send me to Teen Challenge. And even though it was a Christian program, my dad was willing to send me there because at that point they didn't know what to do. So I went unwillingly, and I went knowing it was a Christian program. And I remember having a conversation with my father on the way there, because I had loaded up all my stuff. I'm going to live a couple hours away in this program. And I remember telling him, I know this is a Christian program, and I'm willing to go, but I'm not going to get brainwashed by all the Jesus stuff. Those are my words. And I remember him saying, well, anything would be better than what you're doing now. So he was kind of like, whatever. And I went to this program similar to Pure Life. It was different in a lot of ways, but it was a bunch of ex-drug addicts, guys coming out of drug addiction and alcohol addiction. And I just remember the love that I felt when I first got there, that it was like I was accepted. I mean, these guys would come and tell me, this is what Jesus did. You'll never believe what Jesus is doing. And I remember I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to be a part of that. And my plan at that point was I wanted to, because I had been dealing drugs, but I wasn't making any money because I did all my profits. And so my plan, it doesn't work really well. It's kind of economics 101. So my plan, this is where I was at. This is the darkness I was in. My plan was to go to Teen Challenge for a couple months, have a place to sleep, get my head right so I could go out and be a really good drug dealer. That was that was my ambition. That was like my serious plan in life. I was like, I'm going to go out, I'm going to make a lot of money dealing drugs. That was kind of my dream or whatever. And, I had no idea what God was going to do, but that's what I thought. And so I was there. I had an intense spiritual battle for about a month of really fighting. I tried to leave, and people would talk me out of it. It was like this intense time. And I remember a guy came to me, and he told me, he said, I just feel like there's a spiritual battle going on for you, and God is fighting for you, and the devil's fighting for you, and you need to make a choice. And even though I didn't want to hear about God and all this, something about what he said, I just remember it just made sense. It was like this revelation moment. And that week I went into the chapel. I'll never forget. I went, it was just me and God. It was like a Friday night. And it was Michael W. Smith's worship, his first worship album playing. I remember the songs were going, and I just got down on my hands and knees. I didn't have a nice, neatly packed sinner's prayer to pray. I didn't know what to do. I just remember praying like this: God, if you're real, you have to show me, because I'm going to go back out on the streets and I'll probably end up dead. And all I know is that God came to me in this amazing way and did a transformation in my life that was so radical. It was like overnight, it was like people looked at me and they're like, this can't be the same person. And I remember my dad, he was looking at me and he was like, Teen Challenge is changing your life. And I'm like, no, Dad, it's Jesus. I'm like, and I loved God. I mean, I was like we weren't allowed to read, we weren't allowed to stay up past lights out. The dorm lights went out. And the only place you could have light was in the bathroom. So I would go in the bathroom like all night long, and I'd be reading the Bible, reading the scriptures. It was like, I was so hungry. And they used to call me David because I was like, I'd go out with my guitar in the woods and I'd be strumming, singing by myself, screaming out to God. Deer would be walking by. It was awesome. It was like, the whole world was bright and shiny. I mean, I had this amazing encounter with the Lord. And I remember immediately feeling called to ministry, and so I finished the program. I was there for a year. It was a 12-month program. I graduated. I got on staff there, and I felt called to, I felt like God was calling me into Bible school. And so I got accepted to go to Southeastern University. And when I graduated, there was a few months before going to school. Unfortunately, I was in the office for a period of time by myself. I was working on the weekends. And I started dabbling with pornography again. And so when I got to Bible college, it was kind of in the beginning stages of that battle, but I still had that in my life. And so then we met.
Yes, so I'm from Ohio, and when I was looking at colleges, and I wanted to go to a Bible college, and I was really praying about where God wanted me to go, and one of my choices was Southeastern in Florida. And I was like, oh, that's wonderful, palm branches and beaches and all these wonderful things. But I really felt like God was telling me to go there, and it just all worked out. So I went to Southeastern, and we actually met because we both worked in the cafeteria there. We were both trying to, earn money for it. Yeah, we both had hairnets.
Back then, yeah. I had hair.
Not very glamorous, and he used to wash dishes, and I was putting, sandwiches together, whatever it was. And we would just talk and have fun together, and we were just friends. And so some of my friends were going to see a movie, pre all this, pure life stuff. But we were going to see a movie, and he was with his friend in the cafeteria eating. And so I went up to them and just asked both of them if they wanted to go to the movie, with all of us, all of our friends. And the funny thing was that even though we didn't go as a date, we were all just kind of a group of friends. He went to the movie, and he actually paid for his friend. And Buddy didn't pay for me, but that's okay. I got over it. But we just had fun talking together. And then shortly after, he wrote me this really corny note, like a junior high, if you like me, check yes or no. And again,
and it worked.
It worked. It did. I thought it was cute at the time. I don't know. So we started dating, and we dated for about 6 months, and we were married after 6 months of being engaged.
So rewinding before we got engaged. So I wasn't looking for a wife. I really didn't want to date. I really wanted to stay separated to the Lord. I got out of Teen Challenge. I was kind of like afraid of women, I guess. I don't know, like afraid of dating and getting away from the Lord, even though I was, had some issues I was working through. So when we got really serious, and I really felt like, and I still feel to this day, that God brought us together. We felt like very clearly we were meant to get married. But I had this conversation with Brittany, and I was kind of like, well, if we're really serious, I need to tell you all about me. And I literally, one night, I remember we're sitting in the car, I told her like unfolded everything for her. I had, I didn't mention in my testimony, but I figured it kind of goes without saying, I'd given away my virginity at 14 and had multiple relationships. There was just a whole lot of baggage. And so I just told her everything and said, this is who I am, this is what's happened, and I told her about the pornography. And, you know, like she should have, she told me, she said, well, if you've got that in your life and you don't deal with it, there's no future for us. I'm not going to be part of a relationship with that. So I did go to see a counselor in the school, and he was real helpful. He tried to kind of walk me through, but I would go back to Teen Challenge on the weekends and work, and I'd be sitting in an office without accountability, all by myself, and I would fall. And then I would go back to school and know, I don't know what the time period was, but after meeting with him for a while, I remember making the worst decision I ever made in my life. And I decided, if I can't get free from this, with this help, I'm going to just start lying to everybody and tell them it's okay. So I started telling the counselor, he'd say, how's things going? I'd say, it's great, you know, God's really helping me. And every week, and I'd tell Brittany, you know, things are going well. And so I convinced everybody that this thing wasn't an issue. And what I really believed in my heart was that one day I was going to get free from it. I didn't think I'm going to live this lie for the rest of my life. I just thought me and God are going to deal with this. It's not really that big a deal. It's just some of my past. And so I began to pursue her. We got engaged and got married. And
I believed in transformation, you know, how God can change somebody and they can do a 180. So when he's telling me, you know, I've changed and all this I just believed it because I knew that God can do it. And so, you know, maybe I was naive or, you know, didn't realize what the struggle could be, but I really believed that God was doing a work in his life, and he had done a work in his life, and I could see that. But then when he was, you know, hiding the pornography, I just didn't know. I just trusted what he was saying.
So progressively, you know, when you keep sin in the dark, it only grows. You will not get free with keeping things in the dark. And so my little plan of me and God are going to work on this things escalated downhill. And so we're married, and because of the shame from the pornography, I began drinking when no one was around. I started abusing over-the-counter medication, just doing all the things from my past. I began to do the same thing, self-medicate is what you do. You know, you feel the pain and you figure it out. And so I was kind of handling it on my own, and we began to get involved in ministry. When I had to fill out the paperwork to get my credentials, Brittany was with me and had asked, since you've been a Christian, have you looked at pornography? Have you done these things? And so since she was there, I checked yes in the box. And so when I showed up to my interview to get my credentials, they asked me, and I lied to them. I said, well, it was before I got married. And they said, so you mean to tell us that since you've been married, you haven't looked at pornography? And I said, yeah, that's true. And it was a total lie. And so I lied myself into ministry. And it just became my lifestyle. So I got involved in ministry, became youth pastors. We worked in our church and led worship and all these things. And I had this secret life on the side. And when we actually, some missionaries we knew in Macedonia came to our church and spoke, and we had our plan was to go full-time missions. That was our goal. Brittany had that dream as a child. That was like the direction we were heading. And so we thought, well, this would be a great opportunity to get our feet wet and work with some missionaries. So we applied and got accepted. And it was really during that time when we were traveling around to churches and raising our support that things really got bad. I finally got tired of over-the-counter medications. I went out and I found a connection to get cocaine, and I started getting high and became a total hypocrite. I would stand in front of a church like we're doing today, and I would share this testimony, this glorious testimony, how Jesus set me free. And sometimes I'd even be high. I'd get high before I went to the church. And so we traveled over 90 churches, and you know, I was doing the right things outwardly. Everyone thought everything was great. Everything thought was great, going well. But inside, I was like full of darkness, and I was totally away from the Lord. And I had this myth that addicts have, that if I could just get away from my atmosphere, get out of my hometown or get out of where we live, I can get free. And so I thought missions was going to be like my way to get out of this thing. I thought, we're going to fly to the other side of the world. I'm not going to know the language, the culture, then I'll finally be free. And so we ended up flying over there, and I was still trying to do it on my own. There was times I distinctly remember struggling with not telling Brittany. I always thought, well, if I could just tell her, I could get free from this. But I was terrified that she would leave me. I thought, there's no way she's going to stay with me after all the lies and all these things. And so I tried to just fight it, and we were there for a year and a half. Brittany was a teacher for the missionary kids. She homeschooled them, and we also planted youth groups around the country, so we traveled around. And after a year and a half, we the same thing happened there. I began looking at pornography. I began going to the pharmacies, getting drugs, and eventually I found cocaine over there. And about 3 days after I finally got hard drugs, it was this moment that the Lord did something amazing. And Brittany, I had determined in my heart, I can't tell Brittany. Our first daughter had just been born. She was a month old at the time. And I remember thinking, if I tell anybody, this whole thing's going to explode. And I felt like I had to carry this dream. I'm getting Brittany on the mission field. I'm going to do this thing. I'll get free one day. And so I had actually that night, I remember determining, I am not going to tell her. I'm just going to live this lie until I can get free. And that morning, we were sitting in the bed, and she just looked over at me, and she said, Dustin, what's going on with you? Amen. And I don't know what happened other than the Holy Spirit somehow. I spewed out everything. I mean, in a moment, I told her, I said, I just told her everything. I didn't plan on it. And it was like an explosion went off in our life. And, you can only imagine what she went through, but it was like I went from totally keeping everyone fooled, and then within 24 hours, I had told everything, and 3 days later, we were flown back to the United States and moved in with my in-laws.
So jumping back, when he first told me that, we had been married about 5 years at that time, and I had no idea. Call me naive, call me just trusting, but I just knew nothing. And I guess looking back, there's little things I could have figured out maybe, but when you just trust someone, you just trust someone. And so when he was telling me all this stuff and dumping all of these things that he's been doing for years, I was angry, and I was hurt, and I was sad, and I looked at him and I was like, who in the world did I marry? Like, this is not the person that I thought he was. And I just was so hurt. And we had this, she was 2 months old, but we had this baby, and I couldn't imagine not having a husband. How would I support her? We're all the way around the world. And I pretty much at that time, because I didn't know what else to do, I said, I want to go home. I want to go to Ohio. I want to go to my parents. That was my safe haven. And I did. I told him, I said, if you want to come, fine. But if not, I'm going. That's what I needed. And so he did. And we went over to Ohio. And that's how we ended up in Ohio. And just dealing with all these things and wondering, I still wanted to be married, and I felt kind of like I had to be married, because I was like, how do I support myself otherwise? And we have this baby, and I didn't have a job because we were overseas. And so what I did is I tried to micromanage him. I said, okay, he can't handle himself. So I'm taking the finances. I'm calling him all the time. I'm saying, where are you? And I'm accusing him, and I'm doing all this stuff. And I'm trying in my own strength to keep him in line. And we know that's not going to work. But I tried for months to just do it on my own. And I was crying out to God and leaning on God, but I really wasn't. I wasn't trusting God to see us through. I was trying to do it on my own. And so I thought things were going better. He got a job. We were living with my parents for the first about 6 months. We decided to get our own place, so we had a rental house, and I thought he was doing better. And as far as I could tell, I was, doing everything I could to make sure that he wasn't doing things, and I thought he wasn't. And so after we had been in the rental maybe 4 months, and Abby was about 11 months old at that time, so it's kind of a year time frame. I find out he admits again that he has been hiding things, that he has been drinking, that he has been stealing, and that because I had such a tight hold on the finances, he had decided that he would just go in and steal things. And so at that point, I was ready for him to get help elsewhere. Go ahead.
So during that time, I did do a lot of when we came back, they put us through counseling immediately and tried to help us. It wasn't like we were asked to resign from our missions, thing, but they didn't just leave us hanging. Our leaders tried to help us out. And one of the things they did was we went to a counseling ministry, and they gave me kind of like 5 things. Here's what you should do to get help. One of them was to see a psychologist, and so I went to see a Christian psychologist, and it wasn't my relationship with him wasn't very helpful because it was very superficial because I wasn't really willing to deal with myself. They suggested I get on medication because I had a history of mental illness. I was at 14 diagnosed bipolar. They diagnosed me with double depression, and so they suggested I get on medication. So I went and got on pills thinking this pill's going to help me out. They suggested, I don't remember, a couple other things. One of the things was Pure Life Ministries. They said, since you've got a problem with pornography, we suggest Pure Life. And ironically, when I was a youth pastor in Florida, I helped a young man in our church who was struggling with homosexuality. I helped him get to Pure Life. And I was the guy he would call when he was there in the program. And he's actually, this is like 13 years ago. He's actually living in total freedom. I just met with him for lunch, a couple months ago. He's doing really well. But I was willing to do everything, but I didn't want to do the Pure Life thing. I was like, I'll go see a counselor, I'll go do this. I was willing to do all that. And probably deep down there, I know there's a spiritual dynamic. Probably the devil was trying to keep me from the one thing that would help. But I was very resistant to going to another program because I had been through Teen Challenge, and I thought, I was super spiritually proud. I thought, I already know the Bible. I don't know what they're going to teach me that I'm not going to already know. I've been through Teen Challenge. I've been to Bible school. I had a very, what am I going to do? Go to another program? I've already done the program. So I was willing to do everything but that. But when I finally confessed to Brittany, that was when she pretty much said, either go to Pure Life or we're done kind of thing.
Yeah. So, and I wasn't ready for him to go to Pure Life at the beginning when we came back from Macedonia, for the reasons that I said earlier. But at that point, I was kind of like, okay, what I'm doing and what you're doing, it's just not working. And I was ready for him to go and get help and be out of the situation. If he was stealing, and I'm thinking I've got a daughter to protect and just make sure that we're safe, and he needs to get help, and he needs more help than we were giving and that he was getting at the time. And when he went to Pure Life, God saw to my needs in so many ways. One is that I had never been by myself ever. I was about 25 years old, and I had never been by myself, and I had this 11-month-old. We had this house that we were renting, and for the first about month, the devil just attacked me every night. Fear of all the worst case scenarios you can think of, being by yourself, and I just remember calling out to God and just, God, help me through this. And then it got better and easier. And God just really poured himself into me, but I allowed that. God's never, walking away. He's always waiting for us to lean on him and to run to him during these hard times. And I just started to let him be a part of my life and lean on him and trust him. And God just showed me how he can carry me through that time. And I just had such a sweet communion with God through this time when he was in Pure Life. He was in Pure Life about 6 months. 9 months. And I was so close to God and just had a deeper walk with God. And one of the books out there, the studies, the Walk of Repentance, and they do it with the guys in the program, but that is a valuable book, even for women or just even for anyone that's trying to just get closer to God. And one of the things is that financially, I was working a part-time job. Dustin really couldn't support us financially, and I was just leaning on God to provide for our financial needs. And we had a little bit of savings, but I really didn't want to dip into that because I didn't know how he was going to do. I didn't know if this would work out, if he was going to just go on and do his own thing. And when God started doing something in his life at Pure Life, and he'll talk about that in a minute, he wanted me to go into the Pure Life Oka Wives program, which is counseling for wives. And I was really resistant. I was like, this is your sin, your deal, your thing. Why should I have to get counseling? And I pretty much told him, no matter what, I can't go because I don't have the finances for it. I don't want to dip into our small savings to try to do this. And he said, okay, I'll pray, and I think God will provide. And very shortly after, the secretary of our denomination in Florida called me to just check on me, to see how I was. He knew our situation, pray for me, and just support me and let me know that they were there for me and they were praying for me. And at the end of the conversation, he said, well, we're going to just give you a sum of money. It was like $1,000 or something. He said, we just want to give it to you just for whatever you need. And immediately I knew, okay, I got to go to this program. I got to do this WISE program, that God was leading me to do it, and that he just provided the finances miraculously. And it was such a great time. I was so thankful that I did the WISE program, because it really just helped me to see where my priorities needed to lie and in trusting God even more. And like I said, that book is a really awesome resource. And so, go ahead.
So the ironic thing is, when I showed up at Pure Life, the guy that I had helped years before get into the program was a staff member. And he was actually the one who checked me in when I went there. So it was they said, the director of the program said they set it up because they thought I'd feel more comfortable, getting checked in that way. So it was supposed to be a blessing, but it was like one of the most humiliating things ever. Here I am, and it's this guy, and he told me, he said, you look like you were dead when you pulled up onto the campus. And he's like, I couldn't believe it. And sorry, I'm getting emotional, but I remember walking onto the campus, and I remember having this thought that even if God could do something for me, even if it's possible, which I didn't really believe it was, I thought, even if he could, he won't. Why would he? What in the, look at what I've done, look at all the shame I brought to the name of Christ, and look at the life I've lived. I thought, even if there's hope for anyone, there's not hope for me. And man, it was a 9 months, one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life, but I wouldn't trade it for $10 million. And what happened, it's hard to explain because it's all heart issues. God deals with the heart. It's hard to say exactly how it worked. But I remember the first few months, it took about 5 months, I think, before I really came to a place of complete brokenness. But it's like the whole program is designed to reveal your heart. And some of that is intentional, and some of it's just the Holy Spirit works through it. And so it's like every counseling session, you work a job, so every time you go to work, every time you're talking to somebody, no matter what, it's like you constantly see who you are. And I remember beginning to see for the first time how proud I was, how arrogant I was, how I thought I was so much better than everyone else. And God began to show me how selfish I'd been, how my whole life was really just about me. And I had dragged my family through the mud, and I had done all these things, and I began to see that. And I just began to see, my lack of mercy for people. It was like all this stuff that was really always there. God kind of started peeling these layers off and showing me what was really going on. And over weeks and weeks and months, I came to a place where I remember it was like there was like a constant burden on my shoulder. I felt like I was wearing the weight of my sin. I was wearing what my heart looked like. And I remember starting to pray, God, I can't take this anymore. Like, I see what you're saying, and I agree. Like, I wasn't denying it anymore. I was like, I'm a wicked man. I see the wickedness of my heart. I see it, and I don't know what you want me to do, but I can't live under this weight any longer. And it was, Brittany and I were talking, we could have phone calls a couple times a week. And even though our relationship obviously wasn't doing great, she really needed those calls because she needed, we had all kinds of stuff. Hail damage broke our windshield of our car, and she needed help with that. She was in a house she couldn't afford for 2 years. We signed a lease. So there was a lot of practical things she just needed, even though, we weren't in a romantic relationship at that point. But she called me one day, and I answered the phone, and she said, I've been praying, and I feel like the Lord wants us to fast our phone calls for a week, and you should seek the Lord. And she just hung up the phone on me. And I remember it's so out of character for her. The whole thing was so bizarre that I was like, God, this has got to be you, she just wouldn't, this doesn't make sense any other way. And so I took that time. I was like, I'm going to take this seriously. I'm going to go in the chapel. It doesn't matter if anyone's there. I'm just going to seek after God this week and see what he does. And I didn't expect anything. I don't know I didn't have this this is going to be a breakthrough moment. It didn't feel like anything special, but I went into the chapel that week. And the only way I know how to describe it, it's like God poured out his unconditional, unexplainable, overwhelming love on me that week. And if I could hear what God was saying, it was like the message of that week was this. It was like God was telling me, Dustin, I knew the full package of your life. And I already knew what you were going to do. I knew everything that was going to happen. I knew how you would bring shame to my name. I knew all the things you were going to do. But I still called you. And if you still want this relationship, the offer's still on the table. But you got to make a choice. And I remember being so overwhelmed with this offer. Like, why would God do that? You know, like, why, of all people in the world, why is God in this room with me offering his love again when I've rejected it, when I ran away from it, when I did everything I could to get out from underneath it? And here he is saying, Dustin, I still love you, and I still called you, and I still got a plan for you. I haven't given up on you. And I had a moment, it was a crossroads moment, but it wasn't a hard choice. It was like, who says no to an offer like that? You know, it's like salvation, where God gets all of our sin and our junk and everything that we've done wrong, and he gives us his Spirit and his Son. Like, it's the trade-off that doesn't make sense, and yet it's the mercy of God, and it's his character, and it's his love. And it was like that same moment of God saying, I'll take it all, and I'll restore you, and I'll rebuild you, and I'll give you everything that, you know, it's like he was willing to restore everything and give me 1,000 times better than I could have ever imagined, and all I had to do was say yes. And so for me, that was the moment where things really turned around. And it wasn't an immediate, all of a sudden the sky is blue and, you know, the sun's shining and birds are singing. It was a difficult road to walk through, but it made the rest of the program so much more doable, because now I knew God hasn't left me. He's not done. And I had the confidence of knowing God is in this and he wants to help me out. And so I got out of the program. And actually, I didn't move straight home. I stayed with an aunt and uncle, Brittany's aunt and uncle, for 3 months as kind of a trial period to see if this was going to be real. Because I knew from my own experience when I was in Teen Challenge, it's easy to be free when there's people watching you everywhere you go. You know, the question is, when you're on your own and you can make your own choices, what are you going to do? But the Lord was faithful. Brittany saw the change. She allowed me to come back home. And, you know, there's just been miracle after miracle. The Lord restored, you know, obviously our denomination knew all about what had happened. They restored my credentials after a period. I did counseling with my pastor as accountability, and then my pastor saw the change, and so he said, I want you to preach your first message here at our church. And so I preached. Man, it was like an hour and 15 minutes long. It was like I had been waiting for this moment, you know. So and then he invited me to be on part-time as a youth pastor and eventually full-time. And so, but what the Lord's done in our relationship is the real miracle of, you know, I told you 13 years, it's a miracle. When every anniversary we've celebrated the last 7 years, I'm like, I can't believe it. Because from a human perspective, this shouldn't be happening. I shouldn't be up here behind a pulpit again. I mean, most people, I'm so grateful for my pastor. Most pastors aren't going to invite someone like me back on staff after all that I had done. And yet God has shown himself so faithful to us as a family. You know, we had another daughter. We're actually in the process of becoming foster parents. We're going to be foster parents next month, and we're going to begin fostering young children. But our whole life, every day is a miracle, and it's only the mercy of God. It's only him. He did something that we didn't expect. We didn't know that could happen. And so it's been an amazing walk with the Lord over the last few years.
And most of it took time to trust again, and it took little things here or there, but I really saw that he was pursuing God more than I had ever seen before, and just a hunger for God and a need for boundaries and for just making sure that his life was as transparent and as authentic as possible. And so it wasn't like an easy thing like, oh yay, now we're perfect. You know, we had a hard road, and I had a lot of trusting in him again, and a lot of things that I just had to work out in my heart and just make sure. And then just seeing him real and pursuing God, and his transparency. So when he was struggling, or when he was, you know, having a hard time or anything, just that he was transparent about it, and that really went a long way. And there's kind of three things, and I thought they were they're so important to my life, and I hope they'll bless you. But there's kind of 3 things that I realized during this time of him going to Pure Life and me going deeper with God, and just 3 things that God showed me personally. The first thing, and maybe the biggest, is that his sin wasn't against me. It was against God. He had a God problem, a heart problem that he needed to get right with God, and it affected me, but it really wasn't against me. The consequences, affected me, but it was against God, that he had to get right with God in order for his sin to go away, for his sin to stop. The second thing was that I looked at Dustin's sin and I thought, this is huge. He's got such big sin, and I wanted to ignore my sin. My sin's so small, inconsequential. It doesn't matter. And God just took me through this process of, Brittany, your sins put me on the cross too. Your sins of self-righteousness or pride or anger or whatever it is, that's just as wrong. So even though I wanted to think about his sin and focus on his sin, God just brought me to this place of, you need to work on your relationship with God. I'm doing what I need to do with Dustin, and then this thing can work. But God just brought me into just a deeper walk with him. And the third thing was that God just showed me how I needed to be praying for Dustin. Praying during that time that he brings out anything that's in darkness, that he's bringing to light anything that is hidden, but also just that he's getting deeper with God, that he's allowing God to just minister to him and reach him, and for our marriage, that our marriage stays pure and stays right, and it is going in the right direction. So those 3 things just meant so much to me, and just show me just the reality check in my own life.
So I told Brittany I was going to ask her one question, and we're going to close in just a second.
I know we're really long. Sorry.
No, I think we're all right on time. Maybe we're not. Whatever. We're doing. So I asked her this question because the lie that kept me in darkness. I know this isn't a marriage conference, but I think this will help. And if you're single, one day you get married, this is going to help you too. The lie that the devil had me believing the entire time that I kept it secret was, if I bring this out, this is all going to be over. Like, she's going to leave me. And I remember, and I don't fault her for this, but I remember we were driving through town, on the way to church one day, and I was talking about someone who's dealing with drugs or whatever, and I remember her saying, like, I'm so glad that you're over that, because I could never be married to a person like that. And it was during the time that I was actually starting to abuse drugs. Now, I don't fault her, because I'm not saying she shouldn't have said that, whatever, because I shouldn't have been doing what I was doing. But I remember there was things like that I remember thinking, okay, that like almost like encouraged the fact that I can't tell her, So I asked her, what would you tell a husband who is in that place saying, I can't tell my wife what I'm dealing with. Maybe this weekend the Lord is going to deal with some things in your life, and you're feeling like, I can't tell her. If I tell her, I don't want to hurt her. That was always my kind of lie. Like, if I tell her, I'm going to hurt her. And so I don't want to hurt her. And so what would you tell a husband like that, who's kind of in that place?
So, and that was the place I was in before all of this, but afterwards, this is my advice: tell her now. Tell her right away. Don't wait, because it's already affecting her. Your sin is being brought into the marriage is detrimental to it. Whether she knows it or not, you're already hurting her. And the sooner that you get it out in the open, the sooner you can deal with it and get help for it. And sin tries to hide. It loves darkness, but exposing it in the light and exposing it is what's going to be the first step toward getting it right with God. And also, after you tell your wife, find a mature, trusted believer, because we can't do this on our own. We're meant for relationship, and some of that is, godly counsel. And there's, I'm sure, so many people in a church this size that can really help you with that. But tell your wife, tell her right away, so that you can get it right with God, and that you can work on those steps to be free from it.